I've been working pediatric ER in Louisville for going on 8 years now. You see a lot. Kids with febrile seizures, kids who swallowed a battery, kids whose parents waited too long because they didn't have insurance. After a while, you stop being surprised by anything, and you learn to trust the part of your brain that goes quiet when something's wrong. This case is the reason I sat with a therapist for 6 months. First time I met the boy was early December 2021. He was 4, blonde, small for his age, wearing a Spider-Man shirt that was a size too big. His mother brought him in around 11 p.m. saying he'd had a seizure at home. She used the word tonic-clonic. Most parents say he shook or his eyes rolled back. She used the actual term, and she used it correctly. I remember thinking, must be a nurse. She wasn't. She worked in insurance billing. That's what she said anyway. The kid was completely stable when I saw him. No post-ictal confusion, no tongue biting, vitals normal, bloods normal. EEG, the neurologist ordered, came back unremarkable. We admitted him for observation, discharged him the next afternoon. His mother thanked every single person on the floor by name. Wrote down the attending's name in a little planner she carried. I noticed that because I'd never seen a parent do that before. Second visit was 3 weeks later, right after Christmas. This time, she said he'd been vomiting non-stop for 18 hours and was showing signs of dehydration and possible intussusception. Again, exact language. She said it standing at the intake desk with her son on her hip, and he wasn't crying. Kid with a suspected bowel telescoping into itself doesn't sit quietly on his mom's hip. He screams. This one wasn't screaming. We ran the workup anyway. Ultrasound clean, labs slightly off, but nothing that couldn't be explained by a stomach bug. She kept asking the ultrasound tech what she was looking at, kept asking about the Zofran dose, wanted to know if we were giving him Pedialyte or lactated ringers, and why we chose one over the other. She wasn't rude about it. She was pleasant, almost cheerful, and she stroked his hair the whole time she talked, in these long, slow strokes, like she was petting a cat. The boy watched me the entire visit. Not his mother. Me. Big eyes, no expression. Third time was early February. A Tuesday, I remember, because I'd just come off 2 nights and was covering a short day shift for someone whose kid had strep. She brought him in at 8 in the morning saying he'd had an episode of unresponsiveness lasting approximately 90 seconds the night before, and she was worried about absent seizures. 90 seconds is very specific. Parents don't time these things. They panic. They say forever or a minute maybe. They don't say 90. I asked her why she'd waited until morning to bring him in if she was worried about seizures. She said she wanted to monitor him overnight to gather more data for the physicians. Her exact words. She smiled when she said it. I put him in a room, and this is where things shifted for me. She stepped out to take a phone call. I asked him if I could listen to his chest, and I made a stupid joke about my stethoscope being cold, and he laughed. It was a real laugh. Kid laugh. His shoulders dropped. He asked me if I had a dog. I said I had a cat named Biscuit, and he thought that was hilarious. Then his mother walked back in, and the laugh cut off like somebody pulled a plug. His whole body went rigid on the exam table. He looked at her, then at the floor, then he put his hands flat on his thighs and didn't move. I've seen kids scared of doctors. I've never seen a kid change posture that fast because their parent walked into the room. I finished the exam. Everything was normal. I told her I wanted to consult with a colleague and stepped out. I stood in the hallway for a minute, trying to figure out what I was actually reacting to, because none of it was a diagnosis. A parent using medical vocabulary is not a crime. A kid being shy around strangers is not a crime. I could feel myself trying to talk myself out of what I was seeing. I paged the pediatric psychiatrist on call. Her name was Rachel. We'd worked together for years. I asked her if she had 10 minutes. We went into a supply closet on the 4th floor because it was the only place I knew wouldn't have anyone in it. I told her everything. The 3 visits, the vocabulary, the planner, the way the kid went still. I told her I didn't want to be wrong about this because if I was wrong, I was accusing a mother of something horrible based on a feeling. Rachel listened, and then she said very quietly, "Let me talk to him." She went in as a friendly face, no chart, no clipboard, told the mother she was doing developmental check-ins on all the kids on the floor that morning, some hospital initiative, needed about 15 minutes alone with him for a play assessment. The mother hesitated. You could see her calculating, but refusing would look strange, so she agreed. I don't know exactly what Rachel asked him. I know she came out 40 minutes later, walked past me without looking at me, and went straight to the phone at the nurse's station. She called our social work team, then she called CPS. Everything that happened after that happened in a specific order that I only understood later. The boy was admitted for further observation. His mother was told we wanted to run additional tests. She was cooperative. She sat in the parent chair in his room and stroked his hair. Investigators pulled his records from 3 hospitals across 2 states. He'd been seen 23 times in 18 months. Different symptoms every time. A handful of the visits had blood work that didn't quite line up, values that suggested things had been introduced that shouldn't have been. Nobody at any single hospital had seen enough to flag it. Together, it was a pattern you couldn't unsee. They removed him on a Thursday. I wasn't in the room for it. I was told later that his mother didn't yell. She asked very calmly if she could get her planer from her purse first. The diagnosis was Munchausen by proxy. She was court-ordered into inpatient psychiatric care. The boy went to his maternal grandmother in Bowling Green, then, eventually, to a foster placement while the case went through family court. I testified twice, once in the initial custody hearing, once later. I kept my testimony to what I observed clinically. I didn't editorialize. The lawyer for the mother asked me if it was possible I had misread the situation. I said yes, it was possible. I said I hoped I had. Then I described the way the boy's shoulders came down when she left the room, and the way they went back up when she returned, and I said I had never seen anything like it in 8 years. I still work the same ER. I still see the same kinds of families come through. Most of them are exactly what they look like. Tired parents doing their best with sick kids. But every so often, someone uses a word that's too precise, or a child gets too still when a door opens, and I feel that quiet part of my brain go quiet again, and I make the call. I took the job at Pickens County the summer of 2021 because I needed to get out of Jackson, and because the pay wasn't as bad as everyone had told me it would be. 4th grade, 22 kids, a brick school with a leaking roof over the gym, and a parking lot that smelled like hot tar every morning until about 10. I moved into a rental duplex 2 blocks from the water tower, and for the first 3 weeks, I honestly thought I'd landed somewhere good. The kids were sweet, that part I'll say, clean, most of them. Then, in the 2nd week of September, I noticed something at reading circle. We were doing a discussion about a story where a boy lies to his mother, and I asked the class what they thought about it. A girl named Ava raised her hand and said, "Truth belongs to the family first. Everything after is just noise." She was 9 years old. I remember laughing a little, not at her, but because it sounded like something you'd hear on a bumper sticker. I asked her where she'd heard that. She said her dad said it. I moved on. 2 days later, a boy named Colton, sitting 3 seats over, gave the exact same answer during a different discussion, word for word, not paraphrased. The same sentence with the same cadence, the same pause after first. He didn't look at Ava when he said it. He didn't need to. I checked their forms that night at home with a glass of wine and the ceiling fan clicking. Different last names, different addresses, different parents on file. But when I pulled up the emergency contact page, half the names overlapped. Ava's emergency contact was Colton's mother. Colton's emergency contact was a woman named Ray, whose daughter Presley was also in my class. Presley's emergency contact was Ava's father. 6 kids, 4 families, all listed as backup for each other. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I grew up Baptist, in a town smaller than this one. I know what a tight church community looks like. I know what a homeschool co-op looks like. I know what it looks like when a couple of families basically raise their kids together and finish each other's sentences at potluck. This wasn't that. I couldn't have told you why yet, but it wasn't that. The kids from those 4 families sat together at lunch, only with each other. If I split them up for group work, they didn't complain. They just went quiet. Really quiet. Answered when spoken to, and nothing else. Put them back together and they were animated, warm, laughing, like somebody had flipped a switch on the surge protector. Then came Meet the Parents Night, the third Thursday of September. The rest of my families trickled in the way you'd expect. Somebody's mom in scrubs coming off a shift, somebody's granddad in a Braves cap, a single dad who apologized twice for being late. Normal. The 4 families came together, same minivan. I saw them from the window. 8 adults. They walked into my classroom in a loose cluster and stood along the back wall in the same order they'd arrived, and they didn't sit down even when I gestured at the little plastic chairs. I did my presentation, talked about the curriculum, the reading levels, the field trip in October. When I opened it up for questions, Ray raised her hand first. We wanted to ask about the values portion of the social studies unit, she said. Calm, pleasant. Specifically, how you'll be presenting the concept of authority. Before I could answer, the man next to her, Presley's father I think, said, because we've found that when authority is framed as external, children develop a fragmented sense of self. And then Ava's mother, without missing half a beat, said, we prefer the framing that the family is the first authority. Everything after is just noise. Same sentence, same rhythm, from a grown woman, standing in the back of my classroom under the fluorescent lights with her hands folded in front of her like she was singing in a choir. I said something diplomatic. I don't remember what. My mouth was dry, and I could hear the buzz of the projector I'd forgotten to switch off. They nodded at me in near unison, and then the next parent asked a different question, and the room kept moving, and I don't think anyone else even noticed. After, when the other parents filed out and I was gathering my papers, Colton's father lingered by the door. Big guy, soft voice. He waited until we were alone. He didn't come closer. He just stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and said, quiet, you should accept the invitation to our supper. It's not a request. I hadn't been invited to any supper. I said, I'm not sure what you mean. He smiled a little, said, you will be. Say yes. Then he left. I sat in my car in the lot for 20 minutes before I could turn the key. Not crying, not panicking, just sitting there with the AC on watching a moth bump the windshield from the outside and trying to make sense of a sentence I'd heard in plain English. The invitation came the next morning in the form of a card slid under my classroom door before the bell. Cream cardstock. No envelope, a date, an address, a time, no name signed. Just the word supper in a looping script at the top. I didn't go. I gave it 2 days. Then I went to the principal. I knew him a little. Older man, wore the same blue button-down every day like it was a uniform he'd assigned himself. Coached his grandson's pee-wee team on the weekends, everybody said. I sat in his office and told him, calmly, that I felt some parents in my class were pressuring me in a way I wasn't comfortable with. I didn't name the group. I wanted to see where he landed on his own. He listened, he nodded, he said, well now, they can come on strong, but those are good families. Solid people. You ought to sit down with them. Break bread. You'll see. He said, break bread. That phrase in his mouth stuck out. The way it didn't fit the rest of his sentence. The way he said it like a line he'd been given. I thanked him. I said I'd think about it. I walked back to my classroom, closed the door, and I already knew. That afternoon, I emailed the district office directly. Not the principal, not the assistant. A woman I'd met once at orientation who handled compliance. I kept it short. I said I had concerns about coordinated conduct from a group of parents at my school and that I did not feel comfortable routing it through my building administration. She called me back that night from her personal cell. I don't want to overstate what happened next because most of it happened without me. There was an audit. There were interviews. There was, I later learned, already an open file. 4 families in Pickens County were not the whole thing. There were connected families in 2 other districts. A slate of candidates being groomed for school board seats, a model for how to place their people, quietly, at the level where budgets and curriculum got decided. A supper every month at a different house. I don't know what they wanted with me specifically. I have a guess. I was young, new, unmarried, unattached to the town, and I taught 4th grade, which is where you start shaping how a kid reads the world. I think they were sizing me up for something. I don't know if I'd have been recruited or warned off. I try not to think about which. I finished the year. I kept my head down. The 4 kids stayed in my class. Their answers in discussion got shorter and shorter until they mostly just shrugged. Their parents stopped making eye contact with me at pickup. Nobody threatened me. Nobody had to. In June, I signed a contract 200 miles east, closer to the coast, at a school where none of the names on the roster meant anything to me. I sold the duplex furniture on Facebook and drove out on a Sunday. The last thing I did in that classroom was throw away the cream cardstock invitation. I'd kept it in my desk drawer all year under a stack of graded spelling tests, and I didn't want it in the car with me. I still don't know who signed it. The night shift at the Philadelphia Water Department Dispatch Center is usually the easiest one I pull. 12 hours, 3 screens, 1 thermos of black coffee, and the low hum of servers that never quite lets you feel alone. December 14th, 2022. That's when it happened. I'd been on the desk since 8 in the evening. Around 1 in the morning, I noticed something odd on the pressure fed for a line running under the northeast edge of Kensington. Small deviation, the kind of thing you'd normally scroll past without a second look. Let me explain how the system works, because it matters. Every trunk line in the city reports pressure back to us on a rolling average, refreshed every 2 seconds. In a stable line, the number barely moves. Half a PSI up, half a PSI down, that's it. Old pipes wander a little more, but you're still looking at a graph that basically looks like a flat line with fuzz on it. The line I was watching wasn't fuzzing, it was pulsing. That's the only word I can use for it. The pressure would climb 1/4 of a PSI, hold for a second, drop, hold, climb again, over and over, perfectly regular. I sat there and watched it happen maybe 20 times before I even reached for my mouse. My first thought was a sensor glitch. We get those all the time in winter. Cold snaps mess with the transducers in the older vaults, and half of Kensington is running on hardware from the 90s. I pulled the diagnostic on that specific sensor, green. I pulled the 2 adjacent sensors on the same trunk. Both showed the same rhythm, weaker, but there, like an echo further down the pipe. Now I was paying attention. I checked the work order board. No crews out in that quadrant. No hydrant flushing scheduled. No permits pulled for anything within 4 blocks. I checked the pump station upstream. Steady output. No cycling. If a pump had been kicking on and off, it would explain a rhythm, but the pump was just running flat. I zoomed in on the pressure graph. Between peaks, the gap was almost exactly a second, maybe a hair longer. It was so consistent that if you'd told me it was a lab-generated waveform, I would have believed you. I called the supervisor line, got voicemail. That's normal at that hour. I sent a note to the shift lead's pager and figured he'd get back to me when he woke up around 3. Meanwhile, I kept watching. Around 1:40, I did something I'd never done before. I have a personal habit of tracking my own resting heart rate on a cheap fitness watch, and I know what a normal pulse looks like on a graph. I opened a browser tab, pulled up a stock image of a healthy adult ECG at rest, and I put it next to the pressure trace on my second monitor. They matched, not sort of, not roughly. If I lined up the peaks, they sat right on top of each other, 62 beats a minute, a hair slower during the 2 minutes I watched, then steady again. I got up and walked to the window. The dispatch center is on the 4th floor, and you can see a stretch of the Schuylkill from there. It was maybe 30 degrees out. The streetlights had that hard white color they only get on very cold nights, and my breath fogged the inside of the glass when I leaned close. I stood there and told myself the water was not breathing. I stood there for a while. When I came back to my desk, the pattern was still going. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. My training says that when you see a signal you can't explain, you escalate. You don't sit and puzzle over it. You put boots on the ground and let the field crews figure out what your sensors are telling you. But my training also says that we do not roll a truck at 2 in the morning in December for a pressure fluctuation of 1/4 of a PSI. That's the kind of thing that ends careers. There are guys who've been on the job 20 years who would have laughed me out of the break room. I sat there with my finger on the mouse for probably 10 minutes. What made me do it in the end wasn't fear. It was the regularity. Nothing in a water system does anything for that long, that evenly. Rust doesn't. Even a slow leak doesn't. A bad valve chatters. It doesn't keep time. Whatever was making that rhythm was not the pipe. I called it in as a suspected structural anomaly and requested a 2-man crew for a visual on the nearest access vault. Dispatch pushed back a little. I said the words possible entrapment without really knowing why I said them. That got the truck rolling. The crew was on scene at 2:51. I know the exact time because I logged it. I sat there with my headset on and listened to the flatline of the open channel, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. You could hear the wind in their mics. Somebody coughed. Somebody else was walking on gravel. They radioed in after about 6 minutes of looking, and the voice on the other end was different. Not panicked, just quiet in a way that radios don't usually sound. "We've got a live one down here." The vault they opened was one of the older ones on Somerset. Concrete, about 8 feet deep, with a ladder-rung system that hadn't been inspected in probably a decade. Later, I read the incident report. A man in his late 40s had gone down through a service hatch sometime the previous evening. The hatch had shifted and pinned his leg against the wall on the way in. He couldn't reach the ladder. He couldn't reach his phone. The vault was concrete on all 6 sides, and nobody on the street above could hear him. He'd been down there for a little over 6 hours when the crew got to him, hypothermic and in shock, but alive. When the paramedics asked him how he'd kept himself going, he told them he'd found a section of the main where he could brace his back against one wall and press his good foot flat against the pipe every couple of seconds, just push and release. He said he didn't know if it would do anything. He said he just needed something to do that wasn't waiting. The pressure change from a single adult foot pressing on an 8-inch main is small, really small. Under normal conditions, our system would filter it out as noise, but he wasn't just pressing once. He was pressing 62 times a minute for 6 hours into a network built to notice tiny things. I finished my shift. I filed the paperwork. I drove home when it was still dark and slept badly. For a while after that, I couldn't quite talk about it right. I'd try to explain to people what had happened, and I'd start with the pattern on the screen and lose them halfway through. The version I ended up using with the other operators was shorter. I told them the water had a pulse that night. Some of them laughed, a couple of them didn't. I've been on that desk for another year since it happened. The dashboards look the same. The coffee is the same. Kensington's numbers still wander in and out of tolerance the way old pipes do. I check every deviation now, every single one. I don't care how small.